Cosmic Destruction is yet another 3D beat 'em up, but what I found was that the combat had changed quite a bit. To my surprise and enjoyment, Papaya Studio seemed to have taken a lot of inspiration from Batman Arkham Asylum, which was released just over a year earlier. In Cosmic Destruction, Square acts as your standard melee attack, delivering an array of punches and kicks. While previous titles controlled like beat 'em ups of yesteryear, here you'll be able to glide from enemy to enemy as you would in the Batman Arkham games, making elaborate and endless combos a possibility. In previous games, once you had dispatched an enemy, you had to clumsily run over to the next to keep going. Here, just like the Arkham games, you simply need to aim your analog stick at an enemy and press square to see your aliens spring towards them. This was a much needed addition to the series, and honestly, the combat here is the best it has ever felt. I praised other Ben 10 games for their combat, and I still stand by that. They were fun to play, even if they weren't exactly reinventing the wheel. This game is on a whole other level though. This is really the culmination of all the other games. Similarly, the simple countering system of the Arkham series has been ported over to this game too. When an enemy gets ready to attack, an icon will appear over their head. Simply press triangle when it shows up, and your alien will counter them. It doesn't work as well as any of the Arkham games, but it's still a successful implementation. The amount of effort invested in the story has clearly increased dramatically compared to The Rise of Hex, which made the story an afterthought and turned cutscenes into static images of two PNGs talking to each other. Charlotte Fullerton has returned to write the story, and again, the actual story isn't anything incredible, even by Ben 10 standards. However, it's enjoyable enough, and the cutscenes in between levels are a nice reward for your efforts in the gameplay. Cutscenes can be seriously long. They're not quite Kojima length, but they're still a lot longer than you'd expect for this type of game. The post-level 2 cutscene in particular is a standout when it comes to this. There's also a Chris Farley SNL reference in the second level, which I got a kick out of.
On the other side.
I heard Vilgax lives in a van down by this river now.
Well, you'll have plenty of time to live in a van down by the river when you're living in a van down by the river.
The story is yet another globe-trotting adventure, so you'll be travelling to places like Rome, Tokyo, Paris, and China. You even get to have a boss battle on the Eiffel Tower, which is a really fun experience. As I've mentioned in previous reviews, these varied locations are very welcome as they provide fresh backdrops for levels where you're never really doing anything too different. Only 3 reviews of this game exist on Metacritic. They gave the game a 7, 6.5, and a 3. A whole lot of variance there. I tried to find a review from somewhere like IGN, but all I discovered was this absolutely batshit insane article written about the game. First of all, apparently Johnny Test was just shadow dropped. Like, the game had no release date, then suddenly, bam, 505 Games sends out a press release saying it's available. Secondly, the whole article reads as if it's just an advertisement for the game. Thirdly, the article has a fucking quote from Johnny Test himself, as if he gave an interview about the game. Finally, the article was updated a year after it was posted for some reason. What the fuck is going on here? To top it all off, not much info about this game exists on YouTube. A single tool-assisted speedrun was about the most visual info I could find about this game. There is so much weird stuff going on here. Let's head into the actual game itself and see if that continues on. I think it goes without saying that the XL version of Punch Time Explosion is the definitive version. While the two versions seem pretty similar in a lot of ways, XL adds in a lot more content. 8 new playable characters have been introduced here, bringing the game's roster to 16. Of these 16 fighters, 11 different Cartoon Network franchises are represented, which is a healthy amount, I'd say. In fact, I'd say this is by far the best coverage of Cartoon Network's history in any of their crossover titles so far. It pays homage to classic series like Dexter's Lab and the Powerpuff Girls, shows love to shows from the era that followed like Grim Adventures and Foster's Home, and then includes some more recent shows at the time like Chowder and Flapjack. The most glaring omissions from the roster are Ed, Edd and Eddy and Courage the Cowardly Dog. It's genuinely baffling that these two shows didn't have any representation when you consider how popular they were. I think the roster is solid, but I would have loved if they went all in on being a crossover. Personally, I believe they should have represented every notable Cartoon Network show. Even stuff like Camp Lazlo and My Gym Partner's a Monkey should have been featured. At this point in time, Super Smash Bros. Brawl had 37 characters and had released 3 years earlier, so to have less than half the characters available despite some franchises not being represented kinda sucks. I don't want to sound too negative about the roster though, because for the most part I'm completely happy with it. Fuck Smash Bros, y'all need to tell me who your main in Punch Time Explosion. Arguably the biggest misstep in the story mode is that it spoils the big twist at the end. The finale of the game sees you taking on an evil remote control in what is a moment very reminiscent of Master Hand. When all of the Cartoon Network characters have their backs against the wall, Captain Planet appears to save the day. This is played off like a big reveal, but his big ass blue head has just been sitting on the character select screen for the last 3 hours, so it isn't a surprise at all. It's cool that they paid a homage to such a deep cut as Captain Planet, but it sucks that they spoil this. Having George Lowe as the narrator also just made me wish Space Ghost was the reveal instead. He's a superhero, so it would work in exactly the same way as Captain Planet, but it would also serve as a way to pay homage to Adult Swim, which has been a huge part of Cartoon Network's history. I'm seriously confused why it was panned by critics. Most of the reviews are for the 3DS version, but the reviews for the home console version are overwhelmingly negative. Now, I'm not advocating for it to be on the main stage at EVO.
Reset how much here. He's gonna spend? No, he just takes the damage. Mago's in trouble, keeps it plucked. Dalvin is your EVO Japan 2020 champion with Sakura over Mago.
But I'll be damned if I accept people calling this game trash. Personally, I think a lot of people are way too biased and nostalgic to accept Smash Bros clones for what they are. People had the same general reaction to PlayStation All-Stars 2, which was a perfectly fine game. People will criticise the Smash clone for being too similar, but as soon as it strays from the formula, they'll criticise it for being too different. Some of the complaints from critics are absolutely wild too. Take IGN's review for example. It complains that you have to unlock characters by either playing the story mode or by playing lots of matches. You know, the exact same way it works in Smash. If you're mad that it takes 3 whole hours to unlock every character, you shouldn't be reviewing video games. GameSpot complains about the exact same thing too. It honestly comes across as if they were mad that they were forced to review this game and wanted it over and done with as quickly as possible. Games Radar goes a different route, instead complaining that your favourite character probably isn't here. What? Apart from Ed, Edd and Eddy and Courage, all of the major shows are represented. Nobody is crying because Juniper Lee and the cast of Class of 3000 aren't here. Would Mike, Lou and Og have really made this game any better for you? Would it have been nice to have Adult Swim represented as well as reps from basically every Cartoon Network show ever made? Sure. But it's not this massive game-changing issue when you have all the major favourites here. At the end of the day, this is a fun game. You have to be a little bit joyless or completely hate Cartoon Network to not get enjoyment from Punch Time Explosion. Anyway, if anybody needs me, they can come find me on Punch Time Explosion. 1v1 me, number 1 only, training stage, no items. Ben 10 Galactic Racing was released on October 18, 2011 for the PlayStation 3, Nintendo Wii, Xbox 360, Nintendo 3DS, and Nintendo DS. That's a whole lot of consoles. It didn't stop there though, because it came to the PlayStation Vita once that launched on February 22, 2012. That makes this game the first Cartoon Network game to grace Sony's ill-fated handheld.
I can't understand why this thing is failing over there.
Thanks to a handy IGN article, I was actually able to find out that out of the loads of launch games for the Vita, this was the only one that doesn't have an official overall score on Metacritic. Sites couldn't even be bothered to review it despite it being a launch game. Ouch. Just like a Mario game, jumping on the heads of enemies will defeat them, but somehow WayForward has completely bungled this. The hitboxes for enemies are completely broken. You need to be pixel perfect when jumping on enemies to actually damage them. There's nothing like jumping on top of a snail, expecting to kill it, only for the game to tell you that in fact, you're the one who is dead. I honestly cannot remember a platformer I've played where jumping on the head of an enemy has been this finicky. It got so bad that I just said screw it, and mostly just double jumped away from enemies. When you get to the end of each world, you're presented with a boss battle. These made me want to pull my hair out 99% of the time. This is where the one-hit kill aspect and power-ups not carrying over really frustrates. Performing a lengthy boss battle without the ability to even withstand one single bit of damage just sucks. I can't put it any other way. The very worst of this is the final boss. Once you've trudged through all of this garbage, you're greeted by a boss who has not 2, not 3,
not 4, not 5,
but 6 stages. 6 different stages in a boss battle, and you have to do it without taking a single hit. Not even the most notoriously hard video games ask you to do this. To make matters worse, much of this boss battle asks you to jump on the boss's head, which brings all of those issues on board too. There were so many bullshit moments where I died because I jumped on the boss's head, but apparently jumped on the wrong part of it, and this resulted in me dying. I was basically slamming my head against the wall with this boss battle, getting through a few stages and then failing over and over again. Then, randomly, the game decided to checkpoint me on the 4th stage of the boss battle. I had made it up to this stage before, but apparently this time they wanted me to be able to start from there. It was truly bizarre. With that checkpoint and what felt like a million more tries, I was eventually able to conquer this game. If they didn't give me a checkpoint out of nowhere after 40 minutes of slogging, I would not have beaten this game. In the end, it took me roughly 1 hour to beat this boss. To put that in context, that equates for about 1/3 of my playing time for the game. I hope I'm properly expressing just how bad this boss battle is. It is absolutely ridiculous, especially for a kid's game. If somebody under the age of 12 managed to beat this game, I would be truly impressed. Even ignoring the final boss, this game seems absolutely terrible for kids. Yeah, shows like Adventure Time, Regular Show, and Steven Universe have developed large adult followings, but at their heart, they're aimed at kids. Making a Regular Show game this difficult is just insane to me. If I played this when I was 10, I would have put it down after 30 minutes and never played it again. I'm just baffled as to how WayForward have gotten things so wrong here after making such a great game previously. It's like they have completely misread the situation here. I am so glad the Ben 10 reboot game exists, because the Ben 10 franchise ending for good on this game would have been depressing. Ben 10 Omniverse 2 is a Ben 10 game like no other. At this point we pretty much know what a standard Ben 10 game is. It involves a bunch of different aliens in a beat 'em up style, going from enemy arena to enemy arena, occasionally solving traversal puzzles. There have been slight tweaks and improvements on the formula, but it's generally remained the same, except for the downloadable title Rise of Hex, which was a departure from the norm. Omniverse 2 is a little familiar, but also radically different. Your first introduction into the gameplay gives you immediate insight into this new direction. Remember Temple Run? That was a pretty solid game that gained notoriety in that specific era of iOS games. I know I personally sunk a lot of time into it when I got my first iPhone. Well, the success of that game, which launched in 2011 mind you, has somehow influenced this 2013 Ben 10 game. The first thing you do here is a Temple Run style chase segment. Initially I thought that maybe this was going to be a little small addition to the Ben 10 formula. Nope. This is literally half of the gameplay here. By late 2013, Temple Run was well and truly irrelevant, so the fact that High Voltage went all in on this is a bit of a swing and a miss. But just because something isn't hot anymore doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Unfortunately, High Voltage didn't manage to match the quality of Temple Run in these gameplay segments. These segments basically replace the traversal from other games. Instead of platforming or just running along to your next area, you're asked to navigate these hallways. To get past the various obstacles, you'll obviously need to make use of Ben's aliens. Each alien is put into one of three categories. They're either a small alien who are fast and agile, a medium-sized alien that can use ranged attacks, or a large alien that can use brute strength. For the most part, these alien classifications only play a part in the running. In the regular gameplay, you're free to use whatever type of alien you want. Before starting a new level, you're asked to pick your loadout, having to stick to picking one of each type. The console version of Omniverse 2 gives you 10 aliens to play with, but surprisingly, the 3DS version has access to 16 aliens. Also, the 3DS version has 21 levels, while the console version has 7. Of those 7 levels, one of them is the tutorial, which takes about 2 minutes, while the last level is the final boss battle, which is similarly short. Yes, that means as a whole, Omniverse 2 is incredibly short. It can be beaten in under 2 hours, making it easily the shortest Ben 10 game. But back to the Temple Run sections. My big gripe is that they're just fundamentally boring, while also not controlling well a lot of the time. Temple Run is a fast experience, while the running here is pretty slow, even when you're using the fastest aliens. It ends up making for a pretty dull experience a lot of the time. There were also plenty of moments that made my eyes roll. Many of the obstacles are placed in a way that are just completely unfair and give you a fraction of a second to react to. In these sections, the game constantly switches from being way too easy to offering the hardest obstacle course you've ever seen. Flicking the stick to turn corners was also a crapshoot for whether it would work or not. If you're going to copy Temple Run, of all things, you better not make your version significantly worse. None of the polish of that game is present here. To make matters worse, these running sections occasionally feature moments where you have to chase an enemy down. These are terrible. At first they are ridiculously basic. The enemy is just running away from you, so all you need to do is switch to your fast alien until you're in range, then switch to your medium alien to deal damage. Once you bring the health bar to 0, the segment is mercifully over. It's just so dull, easily one of the most bland experiences I've had. Eventually they try to change this up slightly, allowing the enemies to drop bombs behind them. Instead of adding difficulty to the game, it just makes the section drag on for longer. It is so incredibly tedious. Every now and then the game would tell me I'd unlocked a shortcut, but I could never tell if I was actually using them or not. Generally when you unlock a shortcut in a game, it's super obvious that it's saving you time. But here the game was just carrying on as normal, so who knows? The way that Explore the Dungeon operates is that Princess Bubblegum sends you into a dungeon, you'll battle through 9 floors, fight a boss, and then repeat it all over again. For 100 floors! Getting through 100 floors is a big task, so this game hinges entirely on the combat. This is the main reason why this game fails. As you take control of your character, you have a very limited skill set. You have a basic and charged attack, and you can block and dodge. That's about it. Where the game tries to spice things up is in the many weapons on display here. Defeating an enemy has a chance to drop an item. This could be a health pickup or a token, which I'll touch on in a second, or it could be a new weapon. These generally fall into one of 3 categories. A weapon is either a sword, a gun, or something that is lobbed grenade style. As you progress, you'll find better and better weapons, but it gets to the point where you'll find weapons so powerful that it's pointless to use anything else. The best example of this is the axe. The axe kills pretty much every common enemy with one hit. Once I grab the axe, why would I ever use anything else? I think the absolute worst part about using the axe is that when you lose access to it, the game becomes a massive chore. When you die, you basically lose everything, meaning you start out with your regular attack and have to hope you find a strong weapon again. Playing through this game, particularly on the higher floors, is a huge slog without a strong weapon. The game starts sending so many enemies at you and you just have to stand there and boringly dispatch each of them one by one. To try and keep things fresh across 100 floors, they drip feed new mechanics. You'll start encountering things like lava and ice obstacles, as well as pressure plates you need to activate to access the exit. These pressure plates make an already tedious game even worse. At some point in your explore the dungeon journey, you'll say, screw it, I'm just running for the exits, and this actually works, until it doesn't. The pressure plates force you to explore every inch of a floor. Floors are randomly generated, so while you can't just follow a set, easy path, if you use your map and your brain, you can get to the exit pretty quickly. This is immediately negated by the floors requiring a pressure plate to be activated. There are sometimes a dozen different plates in a single level, with not one little hint towards which one is the correct one to progress. So, the game, which was already tedious due to having to slog through dull enemy encounters, becomes even more mind-numbingly boring by forcing you to test out every one of these switches until you finally find the needle in a haystack. This game feels like the kind of mindless grinding you see in an MMO or an RPG. You know those moments where you train up to take on a massive quest or raid? Generally, those moments come in the post-game, or at the very least, they're a minor portion of the main game. Here, it's the entire game. This game is one 10-hour grind. When you jump into Secret of the Nameless Kingdom, you'll immediately be hit with a sense of deja vu if you've played Explore the Dungeon. To the naked eye, it looks like a proper follow-up to that game. WayForward have heavily reused assets from the previous game, which isn't a bad thing, but this initially made me think we were getting a proper sequel. Mentally, I was preparing myself for another 100 floors. However, while it looks very similar on the surface, it is actually quite different. In fact, it feels like a hybrid between both of their previous Adventure Time games. Once you start playing, you'll realize that the game doesn't take place in endless dungeons anymore. In fact, there really aren't that many floors here at all. Instead, this game plays almost identically to The Legend of Zelda, specifically A Link to the Past. Now, A Link to the Past is considered by many to be one of the greatest games of all time. Not by me though. If there's one thing you need to know about my gaming tastes, is that I do not like The Legend of Zelda, for the most part. I will admit that I'm yet to play Breath of the Wild, and from what I've seen it actually looks right up my alley, but for the most part, Zelda does not click with me. I've just never really seen the appeal. The combat isn't particularly enjoyable and is usually rather shallow, or the puzzle solving is either tedious or involves ridiculously obtuse solutions, like bombing random inconspicuous walls. People also like to discuss the lore and stories, but they've never grabbed me. Overall, the world of The Legend of Zelda has never been my cup of tea. Hey Ice King, which was a clear homage to The Adventure of Link, was actually not too bad though. It wasn't amazing, but I could stomach it a lot better than most Zelda games. I cannot say the same for Secret of the Nameless Kingdom. To put it simply, I hate this style of game. I know I'm bringing a bunch of bias to this review, but I can't help it. Everybody has those genres that they just can't enjoy no matter what. I don't like The Legend of Zelda, which is the pinnacle of games in this genre, so it's a little wonder that I didn't like the knockoff Adventure Time version. For those unfamiliar with these games, here's how it goes. Things kick off and your heroes are given some sort of quest to go on. Once they give you a little bit of story, you're sent out into the overworld to discover dungeons that you need to conquer in order to save the day. One of the key aspects of this style of game is that you're left to your own devices. Sure, sometimes characters will give the vaguest of hints of where to go or what to do, but for the most part it's up to you to figure out what the heck you need to do. Naturally, this results in you basically wandering around aimlessly, and this is where the frustrations start to set in for me. It's not fun to just stumble around blindly. In Secret of the Nameless Kingdom, you're tasked with finding 3 princesses, which means you're heading to 3 dungeons. Discovering the first dungeon is a pretty easy process. The next 2 though, God, that is a slog. Even if you watch a walkthrough where the person knows how to get through every step expertly, it'll still take you upwards of 30 minutes. That means you're spending at least half an hour wandering through a pretty boring overworld. The overworld stuff always just feels like busy work. Enemies always respawn, so you're constantly dodging them just to get to where you need to be. Don't engage with the enemies. It's pointless. They can easily be avoided almost all the time, and unless you need a health pickup, there's no point fighting them. Even then, it's much more efficient to cut down bushes to find health. Not only is this process so unbelievably boring, but some of the solutions are downright ridiculous. At one point, Cinnamon Bun is blocking a bridge. WayForward doesn't even give an excuse for this. They basically just outright say, I'm a roadblock just for the sake of it. It's like that group of dancers in Pokemon Black and White 2 who say they are blocking your path for no reason. The only hint given is that Cinnamon Bun will move if he's given something fun to do. Okay, so you'd assume you have to give him an entertaining item, like a video game or something along those lines. Instead, the solution is just insane. You give him a fart in a bag. A fart in a bag. No, this isn't something I'm making up. First off, why? And secondly, the process to actually obtain this is just so incredibly dumb. To kickstart things, you need to acquire a Ziploc bag. Then you need to encounter one of these enemies who only occasionally sends farts at you. Once you scoop that up, you can take it to Cinnamon Bun. I have no idea how anybody would have discovered this solution on their own. At least half this game is spent doing idiotic chores in the overworld. I cannot find any enjoyment in this. Attack the Light was developed by Grumpy Face Studios, who are newcomers to Cartoon Network video game history, but not to Cartoon Network entirely. See, they developed mobile titles based on Gumball, Regular Show, and Adventure Time. They developed a reputation of being a trustworthy mobile developer for the network. So when it came time to develop a full-fledged game based on Steven Universe, they were the ones chosen. Grumpy Face has seen quite a bit of success with this series. Attack the Light was enough of a success that it received a sequel in 2017, this time on home consoles. This was the first time Grumpy Face had made a non-mobile game, so it's a pretty big deal. Initially, when I started researching for this video, I thought there were only 2 Steven Universe games. However, while doing some digging for this video, I came across a title I had never seen before, Steven Universe Unleash the Light. This seemed strange to me. I had literally never heard of this game in my life before, and it didn't even have its own Wikipedia page. The only mention of it was down the bottom of a page in a section mentioning all of the Cartoon Network games. One quick Google search later and my mind was blown. Steven Universe Unleash the Light actually exists, and it seems like nobody even knows about it. There's a third Steven Universe game. Oh my god, I have to tell the world about this. Did you guys know about Steven Universe Unleash the Light? Shut the hell up. So after doing a bit of reading, I think I know why this game has received much less publicity. Unleash the Light is exclusive to Apple's new gaming initiative, Apple Arcade. Anybody still remember that? Apple Arcade is a subscription service that gives you a ton of games, and one of the games announced at this big reveal event for the platform was Unleash the Light. Unfortunately, this seems to have backfired for the game. As I said, there's no Wikipedia page for it, and the game isn't mentioned on Grumpy Face's Wikipedia page either. The game is walled off behind a subscription service, and when you search Steven Universe on the App Store, the free trial version is the 7th option for me. It's clear that Unleash the Light has a massive marketing and discoverability problem. I'm getting sidetracked though. Let's bring the conversation back to today's game. This game was published by Cartoon Network Games and is the first time we've encountered this in-house publishing arm. With that said, let's check in on this game's score on Metacritic. Oh good lord, it has a 91. Don't adjust those screens, folks. That number you are seeing right now is 100% accurate. Sure, Attack the Light only has the bare minimum 4 reviews required to get a Metascore. Sure, none of the major outlets even reviewed the game. Sure, mobile games tend to be looked at through a different lens than console games. But holy shit, 91! This is legitimately incredible for a Cartoon Network game. The best we've come across so far are scores in the high 60s, so Attack the Light's critical reception has blown everything out of the water. I love Steven Universe, so I was going to be pumped for this regardless, but seeing how well the game fared with reviewers has got me next level excited. Before I jump into my actual analysis of Finn and Jake Investigations, I need to mention how much of a pain in the ass it was to get this game to work. This is yet another Adventure Time game that has been delisted from digital stores, which means I can't simply pop onto Steam or the PlayStation Store and buy a copy. Heck, you can't even just go to a physical store and buy a brand new copy. These literally don't exist anymore for this title. My issues started with the PlayStation 3 version. I initially started playing it, but about 30 minutes in, the game said, "Thanks for playing the demo version," and it ended. My dumbass didn't realise I was playing a demo, but after some fiddling, I was playing the proper version of the game. However, not too far into the game after that, the game started crashing at one specific moment no matter what I did. Time to try out the Wii U version, I guess. Good lord, this was an even bigger pain in the ass. I spent what felt like hours trying to get this to work, trying all manner of solutions. While I was doing this, I tried out the 3DS version, which straight up didn't run. Eventually, I got the game running smoothly on the Wii U, and we were finally ready to start this game. I really wish all of the companies involved in these games could just come to agreements allowing their games to be on digital stores forever. Instead of me tweaking emulators for hours, I could have just hopped onto my PS4 and played the game. On top of that, the companies involved actually would have made some money because I legitimately would have been able to buy the game. The first thing you'll notice about Finn and Jake Investigations when you boot it up is that the game is in 3D. The previous titles all took inspiration from 2D games, so obviously they were in 2D too. This game heavily plays up the fact that it's in 3D. In fact, in pre-release press releases and interviews, they were both implying and outright stating that this was the very first 3D Adventure Time game, which actually isn't true. I'll touch on this in far more depth next week, but Adventure Time Finn and Jake's Epic Quest is actually the first ever 3D Adventure Time game, but for some reason that game is never brought up. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this game graphically. I think what put me off the most was the style they went for. It's kind of like all the characters were sculpted out of clay, and I just didn't really care for it. Also, Abracadaniel straight up looks like a penis here, to the point where I've got to blur that dude. In the show, he's kind of shaped like that, but 3D definitely did him no favours. Personal preferences for the art style aside, I think this is a pretty weak effort for the first ever next-gen Cartoon Network game, and for a game claiming to be the first ever 3D Adventure Time game. It's very unambitious graphically, and the 3D aspect isn't really all that important. You see, Finn and Jake Investigations is an old school adventure game. For you older viewers, think along the lines of the Monkey Island games. Adventure games have always been an extremely flawed genre, even when they were brand new, but each new generation of video games has tried to modernise them somewhat. This has led to things like Telltale's series of games, which are basically an extremely modernised version of an adventure game. Or heck, even something like Until Dawn or Quantic Dreams games could be considered a modern spin on adventure games. What I'm saying is that essentially, old school adventure games are archaic at this point. It's hard to get excited about returning to the roots of a genre like this. Another typical adventure game issue I ran into was that there are so many times you were presented with multiple items that could easily solve the same puzzle. I think the best example of that here is when the game wanted me to remove some gems from a chair. The solution required me to find a dagger to do so, which was ridiculous because Finn literally has a sword with him throughout the entire game. Even worse is the fact that you're accompanied by Jake the entire time. Considering Jake can shapeshift and morph, something that is actually used prevalently throughout this game, made many puzzles seem so dumb. Every time you come to one of these moments, the game gives the weakest justification, making the character say something insane like, "Whoa man, I don't want to get my sword dirty." It's also easily the most narrative-driven Adventure Time game so far. The dialogue can get overbearing, but there's no doubt that it's packed full with the classic humour and charm that makes the show unique. I just don't think that humour and charm will be able to hold the interest of most players from start to finish. Also, what is up with the ending? Firstly, the final case ends literally the same way as Shrek, with all the characters having a wacky dance party.
And then I saw her face. I'm a believer.
Then the final thing you do before the credits roll is take a quiz where you have to determine what the theme of the game was. What on earth was Vicious Cycle thinking? It's just so bizarre and not in an enjoyable or funny way. This week on Cartoon Network video game history, we're going backwards to a game I accidentally missed. In fact, I only ever discovered this game's existence because I was looking up how many Cartoon Network games were still left on Steam. Without doing that, I probably never would have found it. There are very minimal mentions of this game on the internet, to the point where even the Adventure Time wiki doesn't have a proper entry for it. Today I'm reviewing Adventure Time, Finn and Jake's Epic Quest. Coincidentally, the backstory for this game is a bit of an epic quest in itself.
Okay, that was epic.
Finn and Jake's Epic Quest actually started out as a free web game available via Cartoon Network's website. Classic Brandon, always being a hypocrite by reviewing mobile and web games despite saying he would never do that, right? Well, hold your horses before you start screeching in the comments section. Even in its free web game form, Finn and Jake's Quest was a little different. Instead of just playing it directly on the website, you had to download and install Unity Web Player in order to actually access the game. The game was officially released on November 29, 2012, and despite these extra steps, Cartoon Network boasted that it had 1.3 million players in its first week and 16 million players in the following 2 years. It's safe to say it was pretty popular. Cartoon Network's next step was a little unorthodox. On March 27 of 2014, Cartoon Network sent out a press release announcing that Adventure Time Finn and Jake's Epic Quest would be getting a Steam release.
Epic.
This wasn't just any old Steam release though. This version of the game was being remade from the ground up. Finn and Jake's Epic Quest would receive a graphical overhaul, a new combat system, a brand new world to explore, animated cutscenes, and a refinement of the general controls. It seems like Cartoon Network was pumping a fair bit of money into this, which isn't too shocking seeing how popular the free version was. To compensate for what was essentially a brand new game, players would have to purchase this version of Finn and Jake's Epic Quest. I'm not entirely sure who developed the original game, but the remake was handled by NGD Studios, a developer based out of Argentina. NGD Studios are a bit of an unknown quantity. In 2019 they rebranded as Nimble Giant Entertainment, when former Rockstar executive and notorious piece of shit Geronimo Barrera was hired as their vice president. Nimble Giant haven't developed many notable games. In fact, I'd say they've made 0 notable games. The only title I recognise in their history is Quantum League, which looks promising, but it hasn't even released yet. A couple of weeks after the game's announcement, it was released on Steam and seemingly almost immediately forgotten, which is actually kinda crazy because it's one of the few Adventure Time games you can still legitimately purchase. Heck, even Nimble Giant's Wikipedia page and website make no mention of working on this game. There's mention of an apparent Atomic Betty mobile game, but not even a single acknowledgement that they developed this. So how did the very first remake in Cartoon Network video game history do with critics? Well, the game doesn't have a Metascore, but from the 3 reviews it has, the response seems mixed. It managed to nab a 7, as well as a 5.5 and a 4. Interestingly, fans seem to enjoy it a lot. The user score on Metacritic is a 7.1, while 74% of the game's 300 plus Steam reviews are positive. The backstory to Finn and Jake's Epic Quest is utterly fascinating to me. Let's hope the game itself is just as good. The icing on the cake for the battle system is the constant chatter from Rick and Morty. This starts out being kinda cool, but quickly morphs into the stuff of nightmares.
You know, it seems really cruel. Shut the fuck up!
Battles end up becoming just minutes on end of Morty screaming. It's honestly painful. Rick spouts lines here and there, but his dialogue is so limited. 5 battles in, you'll have exhausted all of his dialogue, so for the next 8 hours you get to sit back and hear him say the least funny things over and over again.
Take care of him, Morty. Yeah, you thought you were real hot stuff. Do it for me, Morty. Take care of him, Morty. We gotta win this one, Morty. Go, Morty.
Shut up, Rick.
For the 5th and so far final time, I'm reviewing a Cartoon Network crossover game. On the agenda this week is Cartoon Network Battle Crashers.
Castle Bashers.
Right off the bat, this game raises red flags. There are 2 different release dates listed for this game. The most commonly referenced release date is November 8, 2016, which is cited by Metacritic, basically every review I've seen, and in general, this seems like the actual release date. Throwing a spanner in the works is the November 3 release date I saw listed. Where did I see this? On a shady website down a dark alley? Nope, this is the date listed by the game's goddamn press kit. The literal guide put together to market Battle Crashers,
Castle Bashers,
seems to be unable to list the correct release date. If that isn't a perfect summary of Cartoon Network's video game history, then I don't know what is. I'm wagering that a lot of you are aware of this, but in case you didn't know, Battle Crashers is incredibly infamous. Upon release, it was absolutely destroyed by critics, even more than a usual Cartoon Network game would be. Generally, most of the games I review here hover around the 4 to 6 average review score. Battle Crashers, on the other hand, its average review rating is a 2 out of 10 across all 4 versions. Off the top of my head, I'd say that is the most overwhelmingly negative reception to any Cartoon Network game ever. The most positive reviews I could find for the game were from Switch Player and Nintendo Life, who both gave the game a 4. Not great signs when your so-called positive reviews top out at a 4. The majority of the other reviews fall between a 3 and a 2, but there are a couple of 1.5s and 1s thrown in for good measure. I've played some utter trash over the course of this series, ranging from games that are lazy, cheap, and just unenjoyable to play, to games that have been downright broken. Despite all that, I've never reviewed a game that has been so utterly and thoroughly destroyed. Could Cartoon Network Battle Crashers be the worst Cartoon Network game of all time? In the past, crossovers have been entirely focused on copying a beloved Nintendo party game franchise. We've seen takes on Mario Kart, Mario Party, and Super Smash Bros. Over at the rival channel, Nickelodeon had taken a different approach, crossing over their characters in the Nicktoons Unite games, which weren't just cashing in on the popularity of Nintendo's games.
My God, you're greasy.
For the first time ever, Cartoon Network has done a similar thing. As you could probably glean from the title, Battle Crashers is heavily inspired by Castle Crashers. For those of you too young to remember, Castle Crashers was one of the first big success stories on Xbox Live Arcade. However, that was back in 2008. It's now 8 years later at the time of this game's release, so it seems a little weird to be copying its style. Battle Crashers sees you take control of one of Cartoon Network's heroes as you beat your way through scores of enemies. The game does have a cooperative element, with up to 4 players able to jump in at one time, but this cooperative element is non-existent in single player. Instead, you're able to rotate through characters at will by pressing L1 or R1. Usually in an arcadey game like this, I'd expect characters to play almost identically, with the major difference coming down to the type of attacks or abilities each one can use. Battle Crashers is a little different though, in that each character has a set of stats. Depending on who you choose, you'll see a difference in attacking power, defensive ability, and movement speed. All of this goes alongside the typical varieties of attacks and abilities. However, after booting this game up for the first time, none of this matters. You can only choose Clarence to start things off, so stats aren't going to be too much of a concern to you. You'll soon find yourself with a bunch more characters to play with though, as about 5 seconds into the first level you start unlocking characters at a rapid pace, which are then immediately available. This is kind of a weird design choice, but what I do like is that you basically unlock all of the characters who haven't been featured in a video game yet first. Mordecai and Rigby, Steven, and Finn and Jake are saved till last, meaning you get plenty of time to experiment with Clarence, Gumball, and Uncle Grandpa before you inevitably fall back into those favourites. As I mentioned, characters have unique attacks and abilities. Each character gets 3 of these to be exact, but you'll notice you only start off with 1. This is your basic attack, but as you progress you'll unlock a super attack that is tied to a meter that slowly refills, as well as some type of traversal ability which is also tied to the same meter. To fully power up your team of Cartoon Network heroes you'll need to collect gems, which spill out onto the battlefield as you defeat enemies and destroy random objects, naturally. You'll also stumble across occasional bonus areas and levels, which are always a great source of extra gems. These gems might seem a bit pointless while playing through the first level, but upon completion you're taken to a progression screen where these gems are converted into experience. One of the great things about being able to switch characters on the fly is that you can ensure that no character is left behind. Too often in games like this, I find that the first character you pick is the character you use forever, because all the other characters just fall too far behind in levels and experience. Thankfully, that's not the case at all in Battle Crashers. Each level you gain, you'll grab a new ability, so after just a couple of levels, you'll be fully powered. I was less than halfway through the game when I had fully upgraded not just one or a few of the characters, but the entire roster. This level features massive gusts of wind, which are both seen as hazards and something you can utilize. I'm not sure what I did or if it's just completely broken, but double jumping with any alien would send me into this weird sort of glide. It quickly had Heat Blast looking like Sherry Bobbins.
Do you think we'll ever see her again?
I'm sure we will, honey. I'm sure we will.
I decided to mess around with this and discovered I could basically skip over most of the enemy encounters, and just look at how weird it was when I accidentally found myself at the end of the level. The final level of the game is far less janky, but does suffer from serious frame rate issues. I can honestly say I didn't have a single frame rate issue outside of this level, but something about this level was a big issue. I feel like it might have had something to do with the scope of the level. I'm not 100% sure, but it feels like it's by far the largest continuous level in the game. A show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Cartoon Network shows and retrospectively review them. OKKO Let's Be Heroes is a show that should have seen way more success. Its premise alone had all the hallmarks to make it the next Adventure Time, regular show, or Steven Universe level success for Cartoon Network, but it never quite got there. Heck, it was developed by a bunch of Steven Universe alumni, including Ian Jones-Quartey, the show's creator. I remember OKKO getting a lot of praise from hardcore animation fans, but for whatever reason, it just didn't catch on with general audiences. The show literally had its intro storyboarded by the co-founder of Studio Trigger. Come on guys, how did we let this fail? Looking closely at the show's production is genuinely fascinating. It reveals so much about the show and displays a mindset from Cartoon Network we've never seen before, particularly when it comes to their attitude towards games. The pilot for the show, airing under the name Lakewood Plaza Turbo, first aired in May of 2013. After lots of rumours, speculation, and even hints from Cartoon Network's Chief Content Officer Rob Sorcher, the show would sort of debut as a bunch of web shorts in 2016. Eventually on March 9, 2017, 4 years after the pilot, VP of Games and Digital Products Chris Waldron announced on the PlayStation blog of all things that Cartoon Network was commissioning a season of OKKO and that a game was in development. This is actually kind of huge for Cartoon Network video game history. Particularly in more recent times, it's clear that Cartoon Network have waited to see shows become a smash hit before giving them the video game treatment. But for OKKO, video games were planned as part of the marketing assault from the beginning. Video games were so integral to what OKKO was. Fun fact, a free mobile game called OKKO Lakewood Plaza Turbo was released in February of 2016. The actual OKKO show would premiere on August 1, 2017, almost half a decade after the pilot was shown. Unfortunately, this franchise wasn't long for the world. In August of 2019, Jones-Quartey announced that Cartoon Network would not be renewing it for another season. After 3 seasons and 112 episodes, it was all over. Before the show's untimely death, OKKO Let's Play Heroes would be released to the world, which is what I'm covering today. It came to PS4, Xbox One, and PC on January 23, 2018, despite initially being slated to release around the same time as the show's debut. In November of the same year, a Switch version was released, and the game was eventually bundled with Steven Universe Save the Light. Let's Play Heroes was developed by Capybara Games, who have been around since 2003 and might be the most credible developer to ever work on a Cartoon Network game. Unlike most of the developers used, they aren't a studio who have just been pumping out licensed tie-in games. Since focusing on consoles in 2007, they've released a number of critically acclaimed games. My favourite of these is the incredible Super Time Force, but they've also made stuff like Below and Grindstone. According to Ian Jones-Quartey, Capybara Games had been developing Let's Play Heroes since 2015. Everything about Let's Play Heroes seems like an anomaly for this series. It's been planned well in advance, acclaimed developers are attached to it, and Cartoon Network themselves seem to actually care about it. So, after hearing all that, it's probably unsurprising to see that the game did pretty well with critics. It has a 6.9 average for the PS4 version on Metacritic, received scores of 6s and 7s for the PC and Switch versions, and the Xbox One version was mostly the same, yet sits at a 5.7 average. This is mostly because of 2 reviews of 4.2 and 5.1, but those are massive outliers. Everyone else seems to have enjoyed it. OKKO's development as a whole is fascinating, and this massive focus on gaming is a huge part of it. At the end of my Save the Light review, I hoped we were turning a corner when it comes to Cartoon Network video games, and looking at this, we may actually have. So, the structure is kind of weird here. Remember when I mentioned the day-night system going on? Well, the gameplay loop that creates is the catalyst for how strange this game is, and also the cause for so many of the game's issues. In the first 2 hours, I was mostly enjoying myself, but had one nagging thought. It really felt like I was doing a whole lot of running back and forth, sitting through dialogue, and watching cutscenes. I was getting bizarre vibes, but chalked it down to Cartoon Network, Capybara Games, and the OKKO crew trying to make a game that matches modern standards. So I was really taken aback when it turned out that the entire game was like this. There is entirely too much story, talking, and cutscenes in this game. I know, right? Weird complaint to have for a Cartoon Network game, but it's just overbearing. I'm not even exaggerating when I say Let's Play Heroes has more cutscenes and dialogue in it than every other Cartoon Network game combined. More often than not, it felt like I was watching a bunch of OKKO episodes rather than playing an OKKO game. This actually kind of works because it made me want to watch the show, but at the same time it backfires. The appeal of an OKKO game is that you get to actually play. You know, the thing literally mentioned in the title of the game. Far too often I was sitting through minutes upon minutes of dialogue. The onslaught of cutscenes and dialogue feels massively self-indulgent, and it also feels like the people involved are covering up the fact that there's not much of a game here. As I mentioned, the gameplay is pretty shallow and gets repetitive quickly despite being smooth to control. It feels like all of this bare-bones story was packed in to extend the game's length and make the gameplay less noticeably repetitive. And while the actual cutscenes are great, much of the dialogue scenes are very low effort. Most of the time when you're having a conversation, you're looking at a static screen with characters using the same canned animations over and over again. I was ready to pull my eyes out if I had to watch KO transform into that big-ass anime head one more time. So not only are you sitting through minutes of dialogue in a row, but you're also just watching static screens with canned animation. It's like the world's worst impersonation of a Hideo Kojima directed game. I think the worst thing about this game's overabundance of dialogue is that there's no real purpose to the story here. You'd be forgiven for thinking there is some grand overarching plot here, but there isn't. You're basically doing minor chores while occasionally the show's villain, Boxmore, does things in the background. It also doesn't help that the climactic boss battle is a major dud. The game ends up feeling meaningless and the pace is just meandering. The best way to describe it is that it feels like a season of a show. You have plenty of days at the plaza that are completely irrelevant to the overarching story, and while that works for a season of a TV show, it doesn't work here. The majority of missions you do in the plaza don't matter in the scheme of things, hence why the game actually allows some flexibility for what order you do them in. Occasionally, Boxmore shows up in a cutscene to progress the plot, but almost nothing you do has an impact on that. And it's not even like the quests you're doing are interesting. Most of the time it's just extremely basic fetch quests where occasionally you have to do one fight. I lost count of how many times I just ran from location to location in this game. It's just a constant loop of starting a mission, talking to this person, getting the thing, and going back to where you started the mission. The plaza is also tiny, so it's not even like exploration plays into it at all. It might sound like I'm exaggerating for laughs, but Let's Play Heroes takes place on like the same 5 screens for the most part. Despite all the planning and effort that has clearly gone into this game, it manages to feel smaller in scope than Battle Crashes or the Ben 10 reboot game. My major dislike for this game always comes back to the day-night system. In the show, KO works for Mr. Gar at the bodega. The game decides to copy this, so every day you literally go to work and at the end of your shift you get a paycheck that can then be spent on power cards and such. The game is always stuck in the same loop. You arrive at the plaza in the morning, do a quest for Dendy or KO's mum, go to work and do a quest for Mr. Gar or your work colleagues, and then you go home. You do this for like 15 days. It's almost like Let's Play Heroes is a simulator for what life is like under coronavirus restrictions. All you can do is work and go home, and then you repeat that for the rest of your life. All you do in this game is go to Lakewood Plaza, talk to your mum, fight robots, talk to Mr. Gar, fight robots, and go home. And then you wake up and go to Lakewood Plaza, talk to your mum, fight robots, talk to Mr. Gar, fight robots, and go home. And then you wake up, go to Lakewood Plaza, talk to your mum, fight robots, talk to Mr. Gar, fight robots, and go home. And then you wake up, go to Lakewood Plaza, talk to your mum, fight robots, talk to Mr. Gar, fight robots, and go home. And then you wake up, go to Lakewood Plaza, talk to your mum, fight robots, talk to Mr. Gar, fight robots, and go home. To close things out, a brand new developer has been brought into the fold. Climax Studios have been given the keys and they have a ton of experience, particularly in licensed video games. Most notably, they developed SpongeBob SquarePants Super Sponge and the DS and GBA versions of Nicktoons Unite. And they also developed Silent Hill Shattered Memories. What an eclectic group of games. However, despite their long-standing history, this was the first time they developed a game for Cartoon Network. I had a browse of their official website to see what past games they were promoting, and to my surprise, I found some kind of misleading practices going on. They're showing off the box art for the console version of Nicktoons Unite, which is very different to the handheld versions they developed. And in general, it feels like they're trying to pass off a lot of other people's games as their own. If you just looked at their website, you'd think they were the main developers for Crackdown 3 or Resogun.
Cybernetic Brandon from the future here. Again. After recording my voiceover for this video, I noticed Climax were using a strange box art for SpongeBob Super Sponge. After doing some research, I found out that this is a fan art version from a user on DeviantArt that they most likely took without permission. Super shitty, guys. And they clearly don't even know what the box art is of a game they developed.
Once you hop off the boat and start exploring locations, things are pretty standard. You can control any of your party members as you run around, and each of them has a unique ability. Jake can traverse various gaps, Finn can scout out the map from vantage points, Marceline can smash open locked treasure chests, and Beemo can hack open doors. I think my favourite part about the running around and exploration is that Jake can turn into a motorbike. This is a much quicker form of travel and created a lot of weird moments. There were plenty of times where the game wanted me to use Jake's stretchy abilities, but I was able to go full Lance Murdoch and jump gaps on my motorbike.
I'm gonna make it! I'm gonna make it! This is the greatest thrill of my life! I'm king of the world! Woohoo! Woohoo!
One of the big recurring thoughts I had while playing Pirates of the Enchiridion is that the game feels like it doesn't really follow through on any of its ideas. You've already heard me mention the pirate stuff, which is pretty underplayed all things considered. This also applies to the game's interrogation mechanic. This is the sort of thing I was expecting to be in Finn and Jake Investigations, considering the title and all, but nope, the pirate-themed game is the one with the real detective work. In a sort of, but not really, LA Noire style, a handful of times during your journey you'll need to coax information out of characters.
I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Michelle, but your mother is dead. Do you think you could answer a few questions for us?
Try.
This takes the form of a weird spinning wheel where you choose a calm or aggressive response for Finn or Jake. Your goal here is to pick the correct response each time. If you're unable to extract the info by the end of the interrogation, you fail and have to start over. While there are consequences, they're never really a threat as the game essentially holds your hand through the entire process. It's just laughably basic and easy, and like the sailing between locations, made me wonder why it even exists. You're barely even participating in it. Honestly, I would have preferred to see a well-polished cutscene play out over this half-baked mechanic. Then you get to the cutscenes, which quite frankly are a complete mess. Voices are constantly out of sync here, rendering them pointless.
There's no way to get to the Fire Kingdom right now. There are huge steam geysers blocking the way.
Bet BMO's navigation app could get us through. Hey, we should probably think about putting
What's the point of getting to a story moment in a cutscene if it's just a garbled mess? Cutscenes also regularly fade out before the characters have finished speaking. How does this even get missed when QA testing your game?
Then that's where we have to go. Let's get back to the...
And then the cherry on top for the cutscenes came towards the end of the game, where they put an entire fucking novel on screen for subtitles. Honestly, the cutscenes functioned so poorly that I question whether anybody even looked over them. It's even worse if Climax Studios did look over them, because it shows they ultimately just don't care. Making sure the voices are in sync, that the cutscenes don't fade out prematurely, and that the subtitles fit on the screen are basic issues that should have been fixed as soon as they were seen. Sure, it's probably not as easy as snapping your fingers and having everything run properly, but it's not like we're talking about some super intricate gameplay bug. It feels like a massive lack of care on the developer's part. To top it all off, I had the game blue screen on me. I've never had this happen to me while playing a PS4 Cartoon Network game before, and I could count the number of times this has happened in the past 7 years on one hand. Even Steven Universe Save the Light, which was slammed for being a buggy mess, was not even in the same stratosphere as Pirates of the Enchiridion. The last thing I want to touch on are the story, graphics, and music. Personally, I found the story spectacularly boring. The premise is that Finn and Jake wake up one day and everything is kind of flooded. It's actually an interesting hook to kick things off. But the story that follows is uninteresting. You just kind of float from location to location, doing things that feel vaguely related to the flooding issue. It never feels like anything is progressing, and it's sorely missing an overarching villain or something along those lines to keep you engaged. They sort of try to push Fern in this role at points, but it doesn't come across well. Not helping things is that the game ends like a wet fart. The villain behind all of this chaos just sort of shows up while you're chatting to the Ice King. Finn and Jake are literally talking about how they have no clue who's behind it all, and then Villain McVillainface shows up to reveal that he's the bad guy.
You know, thinking about it, we probably should have been able to figure that out on our own a long time ago.
Yes, but none of you has ever struck me as particularly smart. Especially Mr. Blue over there.
Hey, no need to get nasty.
Gumbald, what's the deal?
He then proceeds to immediately engage you in the most boring and easy boss fight of the whole game, lose spectacularly, and then the game's over. I will admit though, the game made me laugh my ass off with its final scene. Climax Studios has the balls to end it all on a cliffhanger and try to set up a sequel.
Oh, wait, you're serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Fern breaks out Villain McVillainface with the implication that they're going to cook up more evil schemes. I kind of admire the balls on them to do this, considering how poor this game is on the narrative side of things. In many ways, it feels like a poor man's version of the Steven Universe RPGs. They used a kind of similar combat system, and they seem to want to tell an ongoing story. But this doesn't work when the storytelling is half-assed and a cliffhanger is just tacked on the end. Also doesn't help when your cutscenes are barely functional. Well, Mandark's Lab is a minigame collection. Camp Lazlo Leaky Lake Games and that Johnny Bravo game with the ridiculously long name had the same sort of idea, and they were both train wrecks. Here we'll have to play through 7 unique minigames to try and thwart Mandark's evil plans. First up is a dance-off with Dee Dee. This is a pretty standard rhythm game. If you've ever seen DDR, Parappa the Rapper, or Jungle Book Groove Party, you'll be familiar with what's happening here. My personal favourite obscure game in this genre was the American Idol PS2 game.
Like a virgin.
With a little work you could be average, but nothing better.
Button prompts will fly onto screen, and it's up to you to press them as they enter the circle in the middle at the right time. A running theme through a lot of the minigames here are that they have multiple rounds, with the goal being to reach a specific score to qualify for the next round. The more in time your button presses are, the more points you gain. As you go through the rounds here, the button combinations and speed get a little more difficult, but Red Lemon deliberately prevent it from ever getting genuinely hard or challenging. Firstly, these random screen-clearing rockets would shoot off periodically, and I have no idea what was activating them. I wasn't pressing anything other than the button prompts flying onto screen, so I think the game was just doing this automatically. This minigame also massively scales the difficulty to how you're performing. If you mess up, the game slows everything down to the point where it becomes insultingly easy. It's impossible to fail this unintentionally. The final stage of this game is actually quite fast-paced, but it feels like as soon as you miss one press, the game slows down and goes into baby mode. I would have enjoyed this way more if I was allowed to be challenged. And overall, there's no difficulty option in this game. This is begging out for a sliding scale of challenge, but instead you're stuck on a difficulty level that was obviously tuned for children. The only other notable thing here is that Dexter's mech suit finally makes its debut after being teased on Robot Rampage's cover. Once you destroy the disgusting cooties that live within the depths of DD's room, you regain access to Dexter's lab and can start exploring it.
Dexter's in the lab again.
The third minigame I participated in was Up and Atom.
Up and Adam!
Here you jump in a ship and shoot down rogue atoms to collect their cores. It's a ship shooter that, like pretty much everything else we're going to see here, is basic. X or triangle is used to thrust, square and circle fire your weapon, and L1 or R1 are used to perform a stun attack. This is easily the worst minigame so far. The other two hadn't been stellar or anything, but this one was just so boring and provided even less challenge. Continuing the theme of every game having one weird quirk, the draw distance here is laughably small. It was so bad that it actually had a slight impact on finding the atoms, but it's so easy that it never hinders you too much. Much more enjoyable is What's Bug in Dexter. This game is an obstacle course where Dexter needs to chase down and swat a bug 5 times. You'll hold down X or triangle to run, square and circle will jump, and L1 or R1 will swat. While I did enjoy this, the camera angle Red Lemon chose is god awful. Why did they think this was acceptable? Once I sort of adjusted to this painful view, I had some fun, but the game is over as quickly as it starts. Unlike every other minigame so far, this one has just one round. As soon as you swat the bug 5 times, it ends. The track you run around is also quite short. If more content and time had been put into this, I would have been extremely satisfied. So you've completed another 2 minigames and we get some more story. This time it results in Dexter being turned into Old Man Dexter, complete with brand new model. I'd be lying if I said I didn't bust out a massive grin when seeing this happen. Seeing old Dexter hobble around was great. The next 2 minigames are all about Dexter's memories, and actually recreate episodes from the show. First, in Soapbox Derby, he remembers the time he raced against the mysterious driver D, which is a reference to the episode Mach 5. This is a kart racer, making this like the 5th time we've seen kart racing in Cartoon Network video game history. Controls are pretty standard, but where this is different is that you have a constantly recharging speed boost. There are no limits to how many times you can use this speed boost, with a very minor cooldown being the one thing preventing you from using it 100% of the time. That doesn't stop you from spamming it though. Doing this makes the whole minigame pointless. I never even saw my opponent during any of the 3 races you do, except for the moments where I overlapped them. You also really only get 2 unique tracks despite doing 3 races. Yeah, the 3rd track is slightly different to the first, but for all intents and purposes, they're the same except for the final bit at the end. And again, why have Red Lemon chosen this absurd angle? It is not fun to race like this. This could have been a really enjoyable experience. Heck, it's chronologically the first time kart racing combined with Cartoon Network. But it's so half-baked and filled with poor design choices that it's absolutely terrible. Still probably slightly better than Ben 10 Galactic Racing though. My main takeaway from this was that we totally should have got a proper Cartoon Network kart racer in this era the same way Nickelodeon did. You've also got Kevin being shoehorned into the plot. He literally only exists here to allow for co-op play. Now, the co-op is actually kind of a cool premise, as the person playing as Kevin gets all of his unique versions of the aliens. However, it's kind of weird that he just shows up out of the blue at the start, only to never be heard from again if you're playing in single player. Also, what the hell happened to his neck during his introductory cutscene? Kevin, my boy, are you okay? Something you'll quickly notice in this game is that the characters' accents are all over the place. This game takes place in a European town, which is kind of implied to be Germany, but the accents of random NPCs are so bizarre. A good example is this park ranger who gives you a bunch of missions at the start. His accent is a bizarre mishmash of British, Australian, and New Zealand.
You did it, Ben! Well, I shouldn't have doubted you. Maybe you could look into this call I just received. There's some rogue wildlife harassing parkgoers in the picnic area.
Featuring a giant environment to explore, you might naturally be thinking, Brandon, how does little old Ben Tennyson traverse such a large world? On his scooter, bitch! Ben's on his way to steal your girl. Whenever you're playing as Ben, you have the option to bring out a scooter by pressing R2, offering a much faster way of getting around. With nostalgia for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater at an all-time high, they should have scrapped the open world concept and instead made Ben Tennyson Pro Scooter. All jokes aside, implementing this method of transport is really cool. Giving you a faster way to travel makes exploring so much easier, and it's the perfect gameplay addition to get you switching back to Ben. Usually in Ben 10 games, you barely ever see him outside of his alien forms, as there's literally no reason for you to be a regular human. In Power Trip, this changes because Ben is the best form for traveling. However, this doesn't last. Eventually you unlock Accelerate, and once that happens, you'll never change to Ben again. Additionally, there's a fast travel system that uses the Rust Bucket. It's nice to have, but I found that I didn't really use it because of how quick Accelerate is. I was more than happy to run to my next objective, encountering various random things on my way. I will admit though, some of the weird non-combat missions gave me some serious unintentional laughs. Like this beard growing minigame. What on earth was this? You have to grow the beards of these lumberjacks using a serum, but you don't even have to fully grow their beards. As a result, I gave them disgusting patchy beards, and then when the game transitioned back to a cutscene, they all had their bizarre new beards on. It was hilarious. And this section where the lumberjacks are straight up vibing was sick too. The lumberjacks might actually be the best part of Power Trip. It's really unfortunate that Power Trip can't shake off the limitations of being low budget. I was trying to temper my expectations, but just look at some of these sequences. This mission where I'm chasing Hex is hilariously awkward, accompanied by the shoddy frame rate. Similarly, look at how embarrassing this truck chasing segment is. Whenever I started to get into a groove and really enjoy Power Trip, I was always immediately brought back to reality with clunkiness, poor design, or something that would make me unintentionally laugh out loud. To me, it feels like PHL bit off more than they could chew with this game. It's one thing to have an ambitious, cool idea, but it's a whole other thing to successfully pull it off.